Okay, here we go.
And welcome to a deeper conversation with Chad. Hi, Michelle. How you doing?
Hey, Chad. Great to talk to you again. It seems like in the in between of our conversations, we end up compiling even more information that is important to get out for people to at least consider about what's taken place here.
100% piles of it. It just keeps coming, doesn't it?
Like a flood.
And whatever we say, um, all we're doing our own research, aren't we? We're being objective, we're being critical, and we're coming to some good conclusions. And I suppose there's many people out there that won't see what we're seeing, but there's many people that will. And I think there's nothing wrong with questioning, Mr. Michelle. There's nothing wrong with questioning, doing the research, and actually finding out an alternative to maybe what you're being told. And it takes a lot of bravery and things to do that, and you're a leader of that, so I'm always blessed to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chad. It's an honor to work with you and to be a part of your journey, which I believe started about, this has been going on a little over 2.5 years ago, and you reached out to me and said, we need to talk. And you saw some of my work and you kind of got the feeling, well, now it's time for me to start making videos. And then 3 days later, I got your first video and it was like, wow. But didn't you say you had about 10 years worth of collecting puzzle pieces before that started?
Oh yeah, there's a 18, I would say I started the venture looking into everything, but the video aspect is quite strange, because when I met you I hadn't had any experience with the videos, and it was almost like it was a gift sent to me, because being able to work everything. But yeah, the research, I feel like before you step out and you talk, and you've got, to present anything, you've got to do your research, you've got to have your background. And a lot of people haven't saw mine, and probably haven't seen yours, and I've got a backpack on, I have of information that I've collected and it's a combination of physical, spiritual, absolutely everything. And obviously I'm ready now. I was ready a while ago, but I always knew I was going to speak. I always knew I had a role to play. So it was about prepping yourself, like anything, training, isn't it? The best of the best have to train.
And that's exactly how I feel, because my real journey and my real original research started in 2016. And I didn't make my first video until late spring, early summer of 2018. And I knew I had to get it out there. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. And 2016 was when I found the North American star tetrahedron. And then I started writing down places that lined up off of that star tetrahedron, and I wrote it down in spreadsheets. And this is the basis of my research. These are alignments that I found off of that. The star tetrahedron is the Star of David that I found by connecting cities and places in North America. And I knew I found something when I discovered that. And I also knew the ancients were very precise, and that's why I started looking worldwide at where they went. And I'm sitting here today talking not only to you, Chad, but even doing this work, because when I tracked those alignments and did videos about that, and I did that starting in 2018 when I started blogging and my YouTube channel, all of the data that led to the bigger picture of what's taken place here, I found by tracking these cities and places in alignment all over the earth. And we'll get into it, because I put together a PowerPoint to begin with, and then a couple of other things towards the end, for Chad and I to share our information through. But it is based on our own original insights and research. And the missing piece for me was the giant trees, which is what Chad brought to my attention, and we'll be talking a lot about that. I didn't know what I was looking at. I knew it wasn't what we were told, but I did not have that piece of the puzzle. And I think, if nothing else, we want to share with you today exactly why we believe what we believe. And, everybody can do whatever they want to with this information. But I think we can give you a good basis on what our own thoughts and beliefs are based on. So before we go into the PowerPoint, is anything you would like to add, Chad?
No, I feel you wrap it up perfectly. But just to add to that, you did get so many of the puzzle pieces before. It was like, to give yourself that credit, because you had so many. When I look at your work and you piece it all but to the tree, let's say, there's such a trail.
I just want to add to that. I think a common thing between us is that we feel absolutely compelled to do this. That's why I started doing it, because we've been lied to about everything. And in order to get to the truth, you have to let go of your beliefs. Suspend them. Let's say suspend them, so you can get new information in, because it's very deep and it's very diabolical. However, Chad and I both approach this from a spiritual perspective, that light wins over dark, and that there's no way in hell they're going to get away with what they've done. And that's getting more and more exposed. People like ourselves are legion on YouTube that are doing their own research. And that's what it takes. Even if you don't become a YouTuber, it just walk outside your front door and start looking around and start asking questions, because it's literally everywhere.
Speak to your community, and Michelle, speak to people. There's so much. We don't have to make videos. It's just getting out there, isn't it? Talking to people.
Getting out there, asking questions. I mean, where I live is situated right next to a place called Aspen Creek. And I look out my window every day and I see gigantic granite stone blocks. I see a megalithic wall right outside my window. And that's all over here. And people pass by it every day and don't know to ask questions, because we've never been told, and it's been left out of our narrative. It's not supposed to be there, so we don't see it. We don't even think it until you start realizing that it is there, and then you start asking questions. So we have been conditioned and raised not to be critical thinkers, just programmed to, give the right answer in school, go along with the flow. That's what's rewarded. Critical thinking is not rewarded, and there's a reason for that. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start the PowerPoint, Chad, because you sent me something a couple of months ago, and I'm like, okay. And this struck me as significant when I saw it, because my brain thought, so this could explain it. Can you tell me about this? Because that's what I'm seeing.
Look, I saw this has obviously got its own meanings, but on my research, how did I even come across this? I don't even know, but it caught my eye. And when I looked at this around the edges, I obviously saw tree stumps that were on fire, and the earth itself has a root system, a tunneling system, which we spoke about because of the trees, etc., which they're obviously using for their own purposes. And that parts of that seem to be, obviously that's exposed, but then you've got other fires happening all around, and the main fire in the middle, kind of what's happening now. But I don't know, something told me to, because I'm in a lot of my research is Gnostic and looking at illustrations of alchemy and all different things. I like to try to And I think this was in the Gnostic alchemy, but it's very interesting, you know. What do you see, Michelle?
Well, I think the first thing that popped out of me was the exploding trees. Let's say that's what they are,
Yeah.
because that's what we're going to be talking about. And then when I saw the root system there, I thought of the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways they've covered this up is by not making the connection between trees and volcanoes. And we'll give some examples of that. I'm also seeing what we've identified as giant tree locations that have water,
Mm-hmm.
deep water. But let's start with this, because this is significant. So how they managed to hide the giant trees from us? Well, they don't look like trees anymore. They call them mesas, they call them buttes, volcanoes, all manner of names. And that's what they look like. There's no big giant tree there. There's a stump. And it's rock. So they can get away with it and say, oh, well, this happened millions of years ago during whatever geologic era. And all the deserts that we see are the result of desertification over centuries or whatever. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this presentation, but that's kind of a good starting point. How have they hidden this? And so with this picture, what came to mind is we just see the tree stumps because the tops were blown off. And that's been bugging me, because it's like, what happened to the trees? How did they do this? I see the evidence everywhere now, but how did they make the giant trees go away? So whatever this diagram that you sent represents, that's kind of what comes to me as an explanation for what we see today. And we're calling this presentation Giant Trees, the Earth Grid, and the New World Order. And I thought this was a fitting starting point, because this looks as a good an example of anything that I've seen that would explain why we don't see giant trees anymore. They're in name. There's places around where I live in Arizona, Cottonwood, Oak Creek Canyon, Sycamore Canyon, Oak Creek Wash, which I think used to be railroad tracks. They have washes all over. Some are even called railroad washes. And Arizona is a good example, because I think this place was covered in giant trees. I'm going to give you some examples close to where I live. And this place is just laid waste. And we'll talk about that too. So I wanted to start here and then move on to our first conversation. Because basically you said, hey, Michelle, we need to have a conversation about giant trees, essentially. And what intrigued me is when Chad sent me his Mother Earth giant tree video shortly before we had our conversation. As I wasn't on the giant tree bandwagon at that time, they weren't on my radar. But we were finding exactly the same things with our different lines of research. I was finding mines, clay pits, asylums, amusement parks. It's like we were coming to the same places through our different work styles and how we do things. And so this was really the beginning of my awakening to this. And I know there's a lot of good researchers out there doing a lot of good work on giant trees. My focus all along has been this original ancient civilization. The places that I found on my data sheets, the information that came through to me through tracking these grid lines or these cities and places in alignment. And seeing this totally integrated system all over the earth. I've looked at just about everywhere there is on Earth through tracking these alignments. And I was seeing the same things all over the earth. So I'm seeing one long continuous civilization that goes back to Lemuria that developed into the Atlantean civilization that existed until relatively recently. So we're not talking different things. Tartaria was part of this civilization, but it's been called different names, and they still find ways to, obfuscate and cloud what was really going on here. But humanity was highly advanced until something happened. And that was a cataclysm. And there's a lot of different opinions on when that took place, what it involved. What I will say, I have a definite opinion about what caused it. And Chad and Adam and I talked about that in our last conversation on the destruction of the grid, that there was a plasma event that went through. I think it was at the time of the Philadelphia experiment, but let's just say something happened that involved high energy going through the grid. And that was what blew everything out. And I'll save some of that stuff because we do have a lot of information to cover in this presentation. So when Chad invited me to have this conversation about giant trees, my mind went to the cotton tree in Freetown in Sierra Leone, because I had looked there based on somebody's suggestion. Hey, check it out. And it was the cotton tree I could see was at the center of everything in Freetown. And there was like a grid emanating from it. So that was a comfort place for me to start. Okay, I see this tree was part of a grid, because not only was it part of the street grid and the city layout, it was also connected to the railroad. And that was the beginning of my seeing. And then Chad added what he saw when we looked around Freetown and the giant tree evidence. And Chad, can you talk about the picture of the destruction of the tree? Because you let me, I wouldn't have not known about that had you not brought it to my attention.
Yeah.
It was still standing when we talked.
Yeah, it's devastating, and it's absolutely horrible. I remember when I saw the article and it was still half kind of up. The lightning strike, they say, wasn't it?
Something like that.
So it was a lightning strike. But I've been speaking in different videos about weapons, and there's a lot, isn't there? So there's multiple ways to do something, and you can use multiple methods. The tree, what was a question that I did ask myself: what would you do with the wood? And it might be silly to some people, they just chuck it in vans, don't they? But some of this would be very, well, it would be sacred to its people. We know that, but it would essentially hold powers of some sort. It sounds silly, but this is where we probably get into fantasy. But this is what the kind of things as wands would be made out of. You know what I mean? You'd make the best wand out of a tree such like that, with so much significance and power.
And actually, that's not silly at all, because we don't know anything about this civilization. So there's a constant harvesting of mounds and things like that. They take the surface off and they deconstruct these mounds, and there's energy there as well. The other thing you can see in this picture is this kind of flying saucer shaped thing that we talked about in our conversation. That, don't know what the heck that is. Looks like a carburetor cap or something, is just really weird. And it doesn't look too great in that picture either. So maybe it was maybe it was targeted. It looks like it's got soot or something here. So that looks like that could have been part of this grid system as well. But we were talking about this. Do you remember what month it was this year that we talked about that? Was it March?
It would have been
so much has happened.
About around March, and then a few months later it happened, didn't it? It was yeah.
May 25th. Fell during a storm. Completely destroyed. Must have been a heck of a storm.
It's the same story, you know. The controlled chaos, a video I did, it was trying to trace, you know, to show all these different methods they're bringing that down. But it's the same story, and it's an attack. Well, we know it's an attack on everything. You know, it's not just the trees, but the trees play a significant part, so that would be a target. But they've got a variety of methods of doing this. We know that. So, you know, wouldn't it be silly if everything you heard was fire, 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 fire? Everyone would start being suspicious, wouldn't they? You know, like you wouldn't just keep using the same method. It's not that way.
Right. Though one of the nice things about being a truther right now is it's like overreach. So much is happening so quickly that even somebody that might not be inclined to think there was anything wrong about it can look around the world and say, wait a minute, these things are all happening at the same time. You know, and they're pushing the climate change agenda. But with social media and the interconnectedness of, you know, people that are there sending their stuff out, is like, okay, what's really going on here? And I had not heard of the mycorrhizal network before until you brought it up in your video on giant tree stumps everywhere, or tree stumps everywhere, I think is what it was called.
All around you are spirits, child. They live in the earth, the water, the sky. If you listen, they will guide you. Listen with your heart, you will understand.
I think we're all constantly growing, aren't we? And especially like trees. I've always loved nature, but I'm learning about trees every day. Like, I'm not a tree scientist, so I was watching something.
The mycorrhizal map. It connects and controls all of these trees.
I get a lot from films because they've got facts in, and it mentioned the mycorrhizal network of trees, and I thought, wow. And the way he was explaining, so I googled it, and wow, mycorrhizal network. But I imagined that then on a larger scale in my head, and I thought, wow, what could that be on a larger scale then, like worldwide? You know, especially when we're talking about giant trees. It's a system, isn't it? This is the best example we have of that, and it probably is that in a roundabout way. Do you know what I mean? On a larger scale. So it's the mycorrhizal network.
The original World Wide Web. And I think hugely important to life on Earth. There's something about these trees that the controllers or the cabal or whatever you want to call them are trying to destroy, what they don't use themselves, diminish. We'll get into it here in a minute with one of the examples that I have, but I think there's a direct connection with source and these trees. And also, I think you brought up in your videos, there's a direct connection with us. I mean, like that looks like us on the inside with our spine and our veins. So it's a fractal. We're fractals.
What you were saying about the trees being the top blown off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the head being blown off. It's a very common thing as well, if you think about it, in talk, in movies, someone blowing their head off or blow his head off, or in game, you know, it's a very thing. So I know things work weird it's on micro, macro, I like to think of it, or just the world is, everything's connected. So when you're talking about trees being blown off, you just got to think of the human head almost being,
yep.
You know what I mean?
And our history and literature is filled with beheadings. Just absolutely filled with beheadings.
Yeah.
You can talk about John the Baptist, but you go on up through history, through the different revolutions, the French Revolution and the guillotine and the English Revolution and monarchs that lost their heads and Alice in Wonderland and, the Queen of Hearts. There's this constant reference. And as far as I'm concerned, the history we've been taught is fabricated, because I'm seeing a very advanced, harmonious, beautiful civilization. And that's not where we were. That's where they got us to, and filled our heads with this so that we would believe that we're the most evolved that we've ever been, and we're just not. But pockets of it has remained, especially in the East, with traditions, spiritual traditions, and reconnecting with our higher selves and things like that. And you and I both have an interest in that, though I see you as being more advanced in that regard than I am. But I know about it intellectually. You seem to be able to put it into practice in a way that I haven't been able to. But, just in terms of why we're actually here, are we here to work our whole lives and then we die, or are we here for a spiritual purpose? And I absolutely believe that we were here for a spiritual purpose, and that the original civilization knew what that purpose was. They weren't confused about who they were, or the shape of the earth, or where we were in the universe, or our connection to all life. They knew all of that.
Yeah.
And we've just had this the system superimposed on us, so we would be too tired or too distracted.
You know how you say I'm more advanced? I don't believe that, and I'd never speak that way. For me, what it is what you're speaking of now. It's an uncovering of what we already are. And for me, all that it was, I had a wipeout of like a total, they call it ego death or whatever. So because of the wipeout, it was quite clear. But for a lot of people, the veil pulls back at a normal rate, and we're all the same. We're all this beautiful, we're all absolutely pure, which we've been corrupted through, and we've lost ourselves and we forget ourselves. And as you say, they've lied to us. We don't know anything. But everyone is special. Everyone watching this is special. I feel like we're all sacred, special. Some darker than others, with their light's been darkened. There's no, but each light is a light,
Spiritual practice is difficult. It's what do you say, black road or the red road? One road's wide and one road's narrow, and it does take a lot of discipline to really get into connecting with our higher abilities.
You've got to really want it as well, to a degree. I was willing to give up everything at one point. It was what I wanted. It was my biggest one, and I thought that was wrong in some ways. But then when I got it, it was okay. But I wanted it more than anything. Like, that was my only, and that was my only desire, my only want. I wanted that, and until I had that, it was an ego thing. And then your ego gets to a point, and it just goes.
Right. And that's key. We're all connected, and we're all connected by the same being. We're just different aspects having our own experiences. So that kind of gets back to the letting go of things that we believe, including that about ourselves. And so there are spiritual practices that help to release that. Use the word ego. Come back to the realization that we are all one. and
hard to explain though, but that's the truth.
and then evil found a way to crash the party. This is really deeply disturbing information, but it's not the end. I want to talk about that.
Awesome. Yeah.
So before we move on to some of that, these were some examples that you sent about these falling trees and the whole idea of the mycorrhizal network.
Yeah. The idea for me is the coming down of the grid, the tarnishing of nature and the grid and life, and this is a representation of that. And again, how things work. It's working on all these different levels, but it's quite, to me, I almost read the news like, I don't know, it can show you so much, although a lot of it's bullshit or whatever. A lot of it'll tell you and just be able to show you links that if you look across, you can see. And if you just look outside, you can see what's happening. I think it's quite easy to see the analogy that I'm using, and I love analogies. If you've been on my channel, you'll know that I'm a bit of a philosopher. So, and it's not an analogy, although it is. You could look at an analogy if you want, but no, it's literal. It's physical.
So, you brought that up, these falling trees, and then another thing that you brought up is, does the word root route equal ROOT?
Well, if you ever plan to motor west, Jack, take my way. It's the highway that's the best.
And I'm going to have an example here in just a moment, but it's, there's something to that, I think. If you want to talk about that a little bit, Chad.
Yeah. So homophones is the dual nature of words, so root and root. That's how they hide a lot of things through, but they just simply change the meaning of it, and we'll see one thing and it means something else. So you did the freeway one. It was you can't no tree energy, free energy, freeway, route 66. And I also started looking at, because Route 66 is notorious, so I started looking at all the routes, Route 1, Route 2, and there's a good video on YouTube, and it'll show you how they're made, and they all kind of stem from one place to lead to another. And it's the two places that I identified as the where I see trees, ancient trees of significant size in North America. So in my mind, they're following roots. They're following the roots of an ancient giant tree, potentially to another ancient giant tree on the other side, and they've merged those two somehow. But that, all I know, in my mind, they're following roots of trees, of the network, of the grid. It doesn't, trees are part of the grid and the network, so I say trees, but they're following the root system of our grid.
I got to thinking about that, and I've been doing a lot of ley line tracking here recently, and one of them was from a place in the Bermuda Triangle up to Lake Itasca in Minnesota, and in the process of doing that research, passed right through Pilot Mountain in North Carolina. And Pilot Mountain is described as one of the most distinctive natural features in the state of North Carolina. And it has two distinctive features. One is named Big Pinnacle and the other Little Pinnacle. And definitely looks like a tree stump. It's called a geologic feature with the name of Monadnock, which is the same name given to more famous ones like Devil's Tower in Wyoming and several around the world. Monad, a root of that, is a term used in philosophy for the absolute. The absolute being.
Wow.
And again, I think that's kind of what we're talking about. This is a manifestation of the Most High here, doing its thing on earth, doing whatever, these trees were meant to do. But it was a good example because I thought about that when I'm looking at this picture, and US Route 52 goes right there. So I had that in mind when I was doing the research for that and saw that.
All of this comes after a fire on Pilot Mountain continues to tear through that park. You can see it here in this video. A North Carolina Forest Service ranger says that they believe the fire was man-made. At least 500 acres are destroyed so far.
And you sent me, I'm going to go back to this here in just a second, but you sent me this picture, or a picture of Alcatraz as a potential giant tree stump. And when I had done research on Alcatraz a while back, it had reminded me of Edinburgh Castle in Scotland. The way, it was just the way that it was set up. So that was what came to my mind when I found Alcatraz looking like that. I thought, well, that reminds me of Edinburgh Castle. Well, without the giant trees and their symbiotic relationship with this civilization, you wouldn't necessarily look at this bottom picture as a tree stump. And what they call it is like a volcanic basaltic plug or something like that. But when you look at this picture, well, darn, you can kind of see a tree stump there. I do. I might be seeing things that aren't there, but I don't think so. From that angle, it looks like a tree stump.
These are all around the world as well, aren't they? These are all around the world. There we go.
So because I've been following these grid lines all over the earth, I've seen that before. They built these fortifications on top of these lofty places. Like, how the heck did they get up there? Yeah. Much less build. But they did. These are just a few examples. If I went and pulled all the examples, we'd be here all day. So I saw it at Lake Van in Turkey, at Van Castle. I saw this place in Spain. I think it's Loire Castle. Alcazar Castle in Segovia. They're building on top of these craggy places going, why?
It's like, let's just build on that craggy rock up there.
And
they say defense, don't they? But it's not. It's more than defense.
Oh, it's not even defense.
No,
because that's when you get back to, so because you play around with words so much, and we were talking about something, and I said, does tree energy equal free energy? And then that kind of got another thing going, but this would provide that example of the ancients using this. So I would not call this an example of a tree stump blowing off. I think that's what happened to a lot of other things.
Yes.
This is an example of they were using, there was a relationship between this tree technology and the builders. And it was all part of the same civilization. It got fragmented out. It got, compartmented. This civilization built this civilization built that. This is all for defense. But then when you flip it and you look at it as an energy source.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get into examples of this in the New World. But this was, an ancient technology used for good.
Yeah.
When it was originally built.
Why
this relationship?
Why they're so venerated is, I suppose, why they're so fought over throughout history. Throughout. I see. Back to that, the heads off. We've got to consider a variety of ways. Does that do the same way that we're talking about with the world at the moment? It's not just one way. So you can see that some trees would have been felled. Do you know what I mean? You would see that some were almost chopped. You would see that some looked like they were explosion almost. So
some kind of ancient technology, we can't even begin to comprehend how this happened. But there's technologies that have certainly been lost to us. And what got me into this many, many years ago was looking at megaliths and the gigantic stones and how did they do that? That was really what piqued my interest long ago, trying to get me on the path of trying to figure things out.
in my mind, the destruction happened first of the what we see, and then it was changed to rock after, and that's obvious. Does that make sense? That's obvious. I feel that's quite obvious because you can carve wood.
Yeah, well, what I think is that there was some kind of relationship between the ancient builders and these trees and all other materials as well, not just the trees.
Yeah.
And this was an ancient civilization, so that's another thing we've been lied to about. This existed for a very long time. So, we'll talk about why this cataclysm looked like it happened relatively recently, but they knew what they were doing. The problem is trying to determine, like if you look at the Loire Castle in Spain in the bottom right, could some of that be the result of the cataclysm? So like, you see this here, oops, let me see. It looks like it's like a mud flood in rock.
Yeah, that's what
you
see.
So
a mud flood.
So maybe when this event occurred, let's call it a liquefaction event, and shook the earth and caused swamps and deserts all over the earth. Let's say when the ground liquefied, it shifted a little bit and then it kind of molded back.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Something like that, because that's not necessarily a natural way to build either in that example.
No, but I've come across a lot of old photos and I put them in. I send them here, I put them in, and it looks like they've carved into the tree on here. So, like an Avatar scenario, but maybe more manipulated to a man-made extent, where they've carved all into the trunk, if you like, and they've made a tower out of the tree.
And then there's also the idea that there were technologies that could have softened the stone and, that kind of thing, especially with the cave systems and things like that are just like beautiful and look buff. They look like they've been buffed, and are just amazing. So we don't know the technologies. We can just kind of talk about what could be.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to kind of share this from my experience of made a couple of trips to Florida in the last 2 weeks for different reasons, but 2 flights to Tampa, and I like window seats. Don't always get them, but I try to. And I'm looking out the window at just this absolutely devastated looking landscape. And when you look down out at what's underneath, you see a lot of places that kind of look mud flooded. You see what looks like could have been ancient structures, pyramids and other things. And now that I've got trees on my radar, I'm seeing what look like they could have been trees. And so this is kind of a combination in New Mexico and Arizona, but the desert Southwest is like this in general. You look out, you look down, and it's just like this just devastated landscape. And so, and then you know, got the green on this side, you've got green along the coast, but the midsection of the United States is pretty brown, crispy, fried, whatever. And if you look at, there's places that have these, they look like tree roots. So you've got the S-shaped rivers that I've identified that I believe are canals and that serve to function on the grid system. But then there's a lot of these look like root systems. And there could be explanations just in nature about how they happened. But there's an awful lot of places that look like tree stumps. And then this is one of the places I think you've identified.
Yeah.
Because this is getting up into this Four Corners area. And so where I am is kind of near there. And you know, it just looks like it's just been devastated.
Devastated.
And that it wasn't just, you know, desertification and taking place over millions of years or whatever. I mean, it looks like something happened.
So, isn't it? But like, you want to imagine that laser blast and then, and it's going to depend, you know, because if we look at the line, you'll probably see. You can probably, you know what I mean? You can probably see, because there's this devastation. It's in a few places, isn't it?
And where I live, I'm surrounded by mesas, and you know, I'm seeing tree stumps now. I used to not before. I knew they weren't. I knew there was more to the story. I just didn't know what it was. And now that I have that on my radar, it's like, okay, yeah, I see it. And so in Arizona was a pretty special place. It's there's a lot of observatories here. The Vatican Observatory is in southern Arizona, Lucifer. And there's a lot of other observatories, and a lot of places are dark sky, so you know, you can't have street lights and things because the sky is so wonderful. And if you get away from communities that have just a lot of light, the sky is just sparkling, brilliant, gorgeous. I've got the Big Dipper outside my window too.
Lovely.
You know, so it just seems like a special place, and it's a lot like the Nile Valley in Egypt. You've got a lot of Orions in the landscape. You've got the Grand Canyon.
Isn't Phoenix
a lot of stuff
very well known for the UFO stuff as well? And if we've something that I've been picking up in the research is all these tree locations seem to have lights or unidentified objects in or around them. Obviously bases as well of all kind, naval bases or secret bases or etc. But and this just hints to the power, doesn't it? The power and the ley lines and there's just so much, but it's all connected. I think it's just what I'm trying to highlight. You know, if you want to pick everything up and put it in a bowl, you'll start to see that and that all fits into it. It all starts to make sense.
Right. And I'm not up to speed on it, but I know there was something called the Phoenix Lights. It was one of those UFO kinds of things. But I do want to give an example of some things that I've come across, and this was my trip 2 weeks ago, flying into Phoenix. And the airport is right here. And a couple of things I want to point out is they're digging around here. Can't see it on the ground, but there's all these lots and lakes and, you know, things that look like they're mining something. And that's what I was talking about earlier, is they're harvesting this energy from this, whatever it is. It could be a mound or something like that. And it's surrounding the airport. And it's like they're doing it right under our noses.
Yeah.
We're going to get into this more. What's going on?
Right under our noses.
This place is being mined like you wouldn't believe. And so it's like they cut off the water to the canal system that was originally here. And there's canals around Phoenix. There's canals up where I live, but you wouldn't, they're empty. And so it's like they've been able to control the water flow, probably by whatever hydrological equipment or infrastructure that existed previously, but they misused it like they have everything else. And what that brought to mind is when I first started waking up to this, between 2012 and 2016, I was living in Oklahoma City. And I started to see earthworks in the landscape around me. And it just started coming in. And so this is Oklahoma City, and Interstate Route 40 goes through here. There's a lot of roads that converge in this one location. And I'm driving past and I'm looking over and I see this structure here and I'm thinking, what is that thing? Because there's a pyramidal face here. It's circular in shape, so it kind of looks like a particle accelerator. The river is cut off right beyond where this location is. So, it starts to become pretty much nothing. You've got this harvesting going on here. And again, you have the same thing going on in Oklahoma City that you do in Phoenix. Lots of red patches if you look at Google Earth. And I tried to get close to this. So I drive up here and there's a sign at the entrance that says, no trespassing. Don't even think it. What it's supposed to be is your American, Native American museum or something like that, opening in a couple of years. This was around 2014, 2015 when I was trying to figure this stuff out. And there's no getting close to it unless you're on a riverboat on a cruise. It's surrounded by industrial park here. So I got that far, I cut across. Okay, I got that far, I cut across here. This is all private property. You can't get in there. And then this is a highway. So you're speeding right past. You can't get to it. And I found a lot of weird stuff like that when I started trying to, follow the trail. Just a general weirdness trying to get to it. This is one example. But it came to mind when I saw this in Phoenix, where it looks like the river's been cut off, or canal. And same thing here in the Oklahoma River in Oklahoma City. And then you see these canals that are kind of going off. And Oklahoma City is a canal city. So this was my first waking up to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Was in Oklahoma City. This is not far from where I live. It's called Thumb Butte, and it really does look like a tree stump. And these tree stumps tend to have these alignments, lunar, solar. And you can see that with Mount Pilot back in North Carolina.
Natural. And
then the man that did the serpent ley, he's got a lot of ley lines. His name is Peter Shampoo. I hope I'm not mispronouncing his name. Got an interesting website if you have an interest in this kind of thing. Geometryofplace.com. So he's got Pilot Mountain identified as the Pilot Mountain wheel, where he's got ley lines coming off of it. So I was tracking this one from the Bermuda Triangle on up.
Yeah.
Found swamps. I found deserts and dunes along the way. We've got the Great Dismal Swamp here. The New Madrid Fault's supposedly here.
This is where the route started off as well, isn't it? The route for America was around this area.
It would have been about East Coast, so it would have been around this area.
So this is
Moundville up here, so it's like emanating off of this Pilot Mountain wheel. And then when we talked about Arbor Low and our conversation with Adam on the energy harvesting video, you see the same kind of thing. It's like switchboard comes to mind, but that's not the right word. Like, very similar with the ley lines emanating, with it being a central point. And what I was seeing with the highways was a lot the same thing. There would be one city that was like the main one, and there'd be like 4 or 5 roads intersecting it, being in the center. So switchboard, maybe something on the grid, some kind of energy exchange point. Your thoughts, Chad?
A source of some sort.
And you've even got tree in the name of Arbor Low.
Yeah.
With Arbor. And that's important to keep in mind as we go through this presentation. Because places that we'll be looking at don't look like trees in their original form anymore. But
I sound crazy, don't I? Tree. It's that.
So like I said, we're going to cover a lot more ground in here. And, it's in the process of emailing Chad. He sent me the Alcatraz. I sent him the Edinburgh Castle. And, the wheels started to turn and the synapses started to click. And I was recognizing a lot of the island names as we get into this next part of the presentation from tracking alignments. And so that kind of gave rise to putting this presentation together, because we're going to talk about where these overseas countries and territories are, the different European countries. And it gets to be very interesting because it appears they were going for the giant trees. And as we move into that part of this conversation, I want to talk about Chad's recent trip to Tenerife and the Canary Islands and Mount Taita, because that helped me make a connection in my own mind because of what I had learned about Mount Taita and who had visited there in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So take it away, Chad. You did a pretty lengthy video not too long ago on your trip to Tenerife.
It was night 3, and I was visited by a spiritual force in my dreams. It shook me in my sleep and wouldn't let me rest until I had took its message, like a hungry ghost that needs a task fulfilled before it settles. It stayed with me until I listened. I awoke around 4 AM in Tenerife to receive the decode that the word tree is in the name Tenerife, but more so, the term tree of life kept popping up to me, with Tenerife being an extremely close anagram. Simply changing the N to an L, we would have tree life or tree of life. With the N instead of an L, it actually is pronounced as knife without the K. A knife that you cut down with, like the tree has been cut down, as we are aware. Googling the tree of life Tenerife, the dragon tree came up, said to be over 1,000 years old. And although this tree is beautiful and unique, it is almost a distraction from the bigger hidden tree, the stump, Mount Taita. It also gave me Crete and the information on it. It made me aware that tree is also in the name Crete, like sea tree, or C being the third letter could be free tree, and we can change the word from free as in the number to free as in free energy, free tree, or the sea could be seen as sea as in the sea that we swim in, sea tree. Now all these islands seem to be huge trees or parts of trees that are now scattered amongst the sea. It proceeded from Crete to show me the word reset, and the word reset, rearranged as an anagram, creates the word trees. Isn't that funny? That the word reset has the word trees in it. The trees playing a huge part in these resets seemingly. And street. Street also has tree in its name. Myself showing streets and town designs are located on old trees following routes such as the mycorrhizal system. And this could be compared to freeways in the US.
There is this element to it of love and compassion, and that they're still there, the energy's still there, and they can still be saved in a sense and restored. And it didn't make much sense to me at the time because, you know, I'm waking up, I'm reflecting on all of this, and I'm thinking, okay, and I'm trying to write down the words that I saw and how they've been rearranged and everything it's said. But one of the main things that stuck out to me was that they can be saved, they can be restored, it can be reversed. And I remember messaging you when I woke up. I'm sure I emailed you and told you about it.
You did.
Yeah. Yeah. It was beautiful. And that gave me hope because we're on this journey and we're doing the trees and so forth. And you know, we look at them and they look rocked, locked, frozen. And I've done these videos about it. And something was telling me this can change. And it sounds silly, but it brought back to me things that I've saw. In the Super Mario Brother movie in the 1990s, the king, he's been turned to fungi, to some form of fungi. And to cut a long story short, when the Mario Brothers save the day, he restores and turns back to king. And when I was trying to reflect on what it meant, that came to mind. And it was like the queen, the king, the queen, mothers are queens. They can be restored, reversed, a reverse. We can get back to where we once were. We're blessed by these things, you know. It's blessed.
And I think that's important to get out there. We're doing this to bring back knowledge and information. And what this experience of Chad's did for me when he communicated it to me was I had done ley line research through Tenerife several times. But in this instance in particular, Alexander von Humboldt figured prominently. So a couple of things. One is the Canary Islands are said to be of volcanic origin, and we've never had the connection made with trees before in our historical narrative. They're not going to tell us that. And they were visited by researchers from the very beginning of the 19th century, including this man, Alexander von Humboldt, in 1799. And he was a Prussian naturalist and explorer who was said to have climbed the Teide volcano, the Teide volcano, before he headed off to study Venezuela. Interesting thing about Venezuela, and I knew this from the research I was doing along this alignment where I was finding mining and mineral occurrences. Venezuela has the Orinoco mining arc, and other areas of Venezuela have the second highest gold reserves in the world and 32 certified gold fields. And the other thing that's coming up is the relationship between these trees and tree roots and mineral production, gold and silver and other, precious metals, as having a symbiotic connection as well.
For me, their origin, they have work hand in hand now. And I think you are, aren't you? You're there now. It's there.
So these early explorers are following these alignments. They know where they're going and what they're looking for. And to get to what they want, they have to destroy the trees.
Yeah.
Part of it. That's part of it.
Yeah.
With the gold or whatever they seek. Trees had to go. But the trees are energy sources, so it's a much bigger story than that.
Yeah.
So So I also encountered this man doing the research, and his name was Leopold von Buch. He visited the Canary Islands, and he primarily studied the production and activities of volcanoes. He and von Humboldt were students together at the Freiburg University of Mining and Technology, and this man was considered a founder of modern geology. So he's going to Tenerife to study the volcano. Again, they're not telling us the whole story. There's, all kinds of words, going around this, but it's looking to me like the controllers were getting their new systems set up in the mid to late 1700s. And so the Freiburg School of Mining, Freiburg University of Mining and Technology, is the oldest school of mining and metallurgy in the world. And when I saw the logo for the school, I thought of the Cairo beneath it. The mainstream accounts of the origins of the Cairo, CHI-RHO, and, you've got the word chi in there, say that it is one of the earliest forms of Christogram, forming the name of Jesus Christ, and traditionally believed to have symbolized the body of Osiris. But the Cairo symbol is found across cultures and believed to have symbolized the body of Osiris, as well as the constellation of Orion as a depiction in the night sky of Osiris. Osiris represented the third eye in ancient Egyptian spiritual schools, also called the Eye of Osiris. And you actually see the Cairo everywhere. You see it on papal vestments. You see it in St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. You see it in college logos.
Yep, it's everywhere.
It's in the YMCA logo.
Yeah.
There's something sneaky secret going on with this symbol.
I'll tell you another one. Here's another one that you wouldn't. That is that. I know it sounds silly. It's that. When you see them all doing that, it's the exact same. But it's everywhere, as you say, but it can be hidden in a variety of ways. It's even that. It's even the closed eye, the one side, and the X on the mouth to be quiet, silent, shushes. So
they've inverted all of this original symbolism for their own, secret, something they don't know use. But I think it's more than that. I think, there's been this effort to keep us asleep, cast a spell on us, using the original symbolism and meanings. So we would stay asleep, so we would never wake up, so they could carry out their plans for complete world domination and control, which they've done through the grids. And trees are heavily associated with Egyptian or Kemetic alchemy. And what they did was they stole these alchemical precepts and symbolism. Like I said, they subverted it, and they're killing us with it. So, for example, Mercury. Mercury had a sacred use in the original civilization. And in our civilization, it's not used for that. They said, stay away, poison. Mercury was used in the making of hats in the 19th century. And you got the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. There you go again. And if you look at the insane asylums, and I think there were a lot of reasons people were in insane asylums, but they could have been wearing these hats that the mercury seeped into the brain, and that's where the character of the Mad Hatter came from. There was Milliner, I believe, was a hat maker. If you look up millinery, you'll say, well, mercury was used in the making of hats. Well, everything that they could possibly do to lower our consciousness. The early elite families like the Forbes and the Astors were involved in opium, in the opium trade, among other things. Astors were in fur trading, the Forbes were in tea trading, but you look it up, it's no secret. They got their original fortune in drugs in the drug trade as well. So they're trying to get this, and alcohol, beer and spirits, distilled spirits, they got their start early when they were setting up this new timeline in the New World. Get your department store set up, start harvesting all the wood and everything that they could turn into a profit, including human labor, because it's, get into a lot of wage labor. Same thing going on in North America that was going on in Britain with the mills and everything. In the same period. That's what that was. That was just a horrible life.
That's what, yeah.
Horrible life.
Horrible.
And then we read about it in Dickens, see movies about it. That's what they're talking about. Oliver Twist, orphans and workhouses being treated like dirt.
But this is where a lot of my visuals come from, the videos, as you know. So they're deep to me. They weren't nice. You know that, like, people watch Oliver Twist and it's like a nice, like, nah, them stuff's scary and dark.
Mm-hmm. But they're programming us.
Yeah,
they're giving us these new images of what life was like. And then I don't know about in your school system, but in my school system, that was all required reading. And
oh yeah, you had your required reading, didn't you?
It was Dickens, and it was Jack London and Mark Twain.
Yep, the approved ones with the tick. Yeah.
So they were all influencers of their day. And anyway, so there was a connection between Egyptian alchemy and the Tree of Life here. As you see, there was a connection with trees, and we're seeing that, that there's some kind of alchemical relationship going on with the trees. And what gets really confusing is the controllers separated everything out when originally it was all one. So the Kemetic mystery schools, the tribes of Israel, Islam, it was all part of the same thing in the original civilization. And, it all got taken apart and, turned into the system that we live in today. And there again, you have to kind of step back and just be open, and even if it doesn't change your mind, just take it for the spirit that it's given in, which is we're just trying to figure out what the heck happened here and what it looks like.
That's it.
So this came up on a Facebook feed, and this is the best example of a tree stump looking volcano that I know of. So this is the Hera of Arhab volcano in Yemen, and I shot it off to Chad, and you kind of looked into it a little bit more. So in terms of supporting our argument that giant trees were also volcanoes, this is a really good example.
Yeah. All around the world, we build our towns on them or next to them. They're built around it, and they slowly move in until they take it. It's close to harvest the resources, and you build the town from the tree.
You found some old maps of Cairo, Egypt showing that.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you look up Yemen, you'll see these tree stump cities. So there's definitely something going on there. And again, when you look at maybe not see it if you don't know about the tree stumps, but then once you do, it's like, oh yeah. So I live near Dewey Humboldt, and I thought of this with the Canary Island, Tenerife, Alexander von Humboldt connection that Chad was making for me. And I have not had a chance yet to really go and explore. It's on my list. It's just now cooling off enough to be comfortable. But this has intrigued me. And so, founded in 1912 and the gateway to historic mining districts. And then I've got the arrow pointing at the Agua Fria River, and it looks like a canal to me, especially boots on the ground. It looks like a canal. And there's a railroad history through this whole area. And, again, that's all been removed from here. It's supposed to be Wild West. So they pretty much dismantled most of the railroad through this area. There's one section left in Cottonwood that is a tourist attraction through the Verde Canyon. But it's pretty much been literally dismantled. And again, this kind of thing is hard to get to. So river access is cut off, and it would have been beside the river. In the one I know of in the Verde River, but this area too. And it was named for Alexander, our friend from the Canary Islands, and also Admiral George Dewey, who was a hero of the Spanish-American War. And I think when you look at the Mexican-American War, which was in the late 1840s in the Southwest, in this area where I live, and you also have the Spanish-American War in the late 1890s, and then you have the Philippine-American War. I think that was all about conquest of this original civilization. And again, you're not going to find that looking it up online, but you start looking at the personalities and the details and other things that start to come out about it. It's definitely highly suspect for that. I mean, how did they subdue all of this? And again, there's a lot of questions around the timing of the cataclysm. When did it happen? How did they do this? So we're just kind of picking up bits and pieces and trying to figure out where to put them. But in terms of what's in our historical record, Dewey Humboldt became a mining town. And, there's just a lot of interesting history that's completely different from the Wild West history that we're taught about this area. So anywhere you go, you're going to see the Wild West. And there's just a whole lot of other stuff going on as well. And somewhere we got into a little bit of a conversation about these old movies, like Valley of the Giants, that have to do with these giant trees. And not only that, but they have plot lines. It says here, accidentally, the claims Howard had towards the land get destroyed in a fire, giving Bill a chance to reclaim ownership. Bill got his lumber cut and shipped within 6 weeks. Howard attempts to stop Bill by destroying the railroad, damming the river, and locking him and Lee in the caboose of the train and sending it towards the destroyed track. So talking about destruction earlier, and those key words in there, destroying the railroad, damming the river, sending it towards the destroyed track. That's all telling me what they were doing, along with, felling these giant trees.
I just think that they're telling. I looked into it the same as you, and I had a little smile. The plot line was amazing, and it's an early film. It's early, and if we're talking about disclosure, you got to.
I'd say absolutely. And I think that's what we're talking about here. They were disclosing truths in these early movies. And it was filmed in Humboldt County, which is another place that was named after Alexander von Humboldt.
The guy.
So this guy keeps showing up in these places with mines and trees. And this Humboldt County, the home of the redwoods, contains over 40% of all remaining old-growth coast redwood trees. And in this county, areas, cities, and towns are known for hundreds of ornate examples of Victorian architecture. And as far as I'm concerned, that's code word for original architecture that was claimed to be Victorian era. Yeah. And Queen Victoria was just like the presiding monarch over this whole reset. And again, you have the big trees and, more stories about involving sequoias in this example in the storyline. And it was filmed in Humboldt County. So they've been, dropping breadcrumbs for a while in terms of something hidden behind what appear to be the plot lines of these movies.
I'm sure there was an early Charlie Chaplin as well about gold mining, one of his early ones. I'm sure I've watched it. Rick's just there in my head. I'm just trying to think of early. That would have been significant as well, showing that, Yeah.
I mean, they had Max Sennett and the Keystone Cops being filmed there in around the Hollywood area, and they're doing stunts on streetcars and things like that. And then the streetcars are gone not too long after that. And is anybody questioning why these extensive streetcar systems that were once everywhere aren't there anymore? It's like, but we don't. It's like,
No? It's wrong to question, isn't it? Almost, like that's what we've been drilled into us. But we aren't anymore. Like there's a lot going to trouble for that. And this is what we've got to remember back before. But so
So just some examples of the clues that are out there in terms of what's going on. And interesting thing with this Alexander von Humboldt character is the time frame that we're looking at is the early 1800s. So he went to Tenerife around 1799, somewhere in there. And DuPont was setting up their explosives in Wilmington, Delaware in 1802, 1803, somewhere around there. And that's about the same time as the Lewis and Clark expedition. And so that would be the Louisiana Purchase was in 1803, and they went on their expedition in 1804 to 1806. And I mentioned the Astors earlier. They ended up in this area here, which is where Astoria, Oregon is. And he was extending the fur trade out this way. And, again, they've given us a completely different narrative besides what was going on. I mentioned in a previous conversation on energy harvesting that when I was researching the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Rockefellers and Standard Oil showed up at the place where the expedition began. So I found the Rockefellers, I found John Jacob Astor, I found Washburn, Calawater Washburn, who was one of the founders of General Mills, major food company. So the Cabal families were showing up all along the way of this expedition. So that was all around, the 1799, 1803, 1804, 1805, 1806 time period, when a lot of this stuff seemed to be getting underway. What are they doing? The Ames Shovel Shop was established in Easton, Massachusetts in 1803. I found this place on an alignment. I was tracking an alignment from Washington, D.C. It was a long distance alignment. And this place showed up. So it's like, what do you need shovels for? Digging things out. So this apparently opened the railroad, Transcontinental Railroad.
Can I just add something here, Michelle? This is a little bit off subject. We'll get back to you. I live in a place called the Black Country. I don't know if I've ever told you before. It's called the Black Country. And the reason it was called the Black Country is because the amount of mining that took place here. And I'm just thinking about our reasoning, and it's crazy that I live in this place. I haven't really ever thought about it as a kid. Essentially, everything came from this area in terms of coal at one point. It was called the Black Country because when you looked up, the skies were black and there was soot. It was just black everywhere. A big ditch. That's what you see, big hills, big holes everywhere throughout this area.
Well, that's what they turned it into. And the Derwent River Valley up around Derbyshire was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. So that's not far from where you live. And, we talked about that in our first tree conversation. And I live near the Black Hills. And I'm going to tell you, and refer to instead the original people, because you've got it hidden in language, like, you've brilliantly decoded so many things, the same idea. Black River, Black Mesa, Black Swamp.
It's right. And this is the heart of the Midlands, the Black Country. So if you want to take it on the other moors, it's a significant area, a significant place where you Derbyshire, all the things you've highlighted.
And I can show you the same architecture there that, you find all over the world. And it's distinctly Moorish architecture, because I can show you examples from Moorish Spain, where they gave credit to the Moors for 700 years. And I can show you the same architectural style in England and America, in Australia. They've wiped that clean with this cataclysm, and they came in and they imposed their own system. And I mentioned the Lewis and Clark expedition, and what I found there. Fort Clatsop, where they ended up, it was right next to Astoria, which was a capital of John Jacob the Astor Empire on the West Coast. And another interesting thing is that the doctrine of discovery was used to justify the lands that were claimed by the United States government as a result of this expedition. And, the explorers were, exchanging coins and medallions and gifts, supposedly. And the claim to the land was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court shortly after that, like in the 1820s, which justified these papal bulls from the 1400s for the land grab. Pope Alexander VI Intercetera Bull, and then there were two other bulls that were used to justify the taking of this land. So that was part of what the Lewis and Clark expedition was about. But again, it's so hard to know what really happened here, but this is what our historical record tells us. And I'm pretty sure at some point the history is real, but prior to that, I think a lot of it's just been fabricated. But somewhere they put themselves into the history.
Yeah.
So this is a map of the British protectorates around the world. And I've given a few examples here. Again, I could go to each and every one of them, but this will give you an idea. And I've found these places, most of them I found tracking alignments. And so that's kind of how I've heard of most of them. Bermuda was one of the first ones that I did when I was tracking a long distance alignment from Merida, Mexico. It took me on up that way. And there was a really large British naval dockyard there for quite some time. And there's a ton of star forts on that little island. And a couple of places like that. I'm going to mention another one here in just a moment. So, we're gonna kind of glide into some other related topics here in just a moment. But I want to give examples of what I came to realize in this little thread going on with Chad. And that was a holy cow moment. Because like I said, I'd looked at a lot of these islands already and didn't realize what I was seeing. So one of the places that comes up is the Rock of Gibraltar. And a couple of things to point out here. One is, there's a shaped shoreline going around this guy. The jetties over here. Again, I can show you a lot of other examples of the same thing where they've actually been shaped. Same style of everything, you name it. So now that we're talking about giant tree stumps, how hard is it to see the Rock of Gibraltar as a tree stump? You're talking to the choir here, I know, but what do you think, Chad?
Me and you are the same. I can't look at anything anymore without seeing something else. It's a joke. Everyone's out loving taking photos, and I'm like, yeah, I see something else, but yeah, that's one. I visited there as well as a kid. It's one of the places I went to. I went to somewhere close to it. We went over on the boat. But I never knew at that time either. But it's got a massive tunnel system. I remember as a kid, the one story that stuck out to me, because there's all monkeys. There's a lot of monkeys around on the island. And apparently there's a tunnel system that goes from there all the way under the sea. It goes under the sea and pops up in Africa or somewhere. And I don't know how true it is, but apparently the monkeys know this tunneling system. And that's how they got on the island, like in the first place, a lot of them. So, yeah.
It was also a base during the Second World War for the Allied Expeditionary Forces. So they coordinated a lot of stuff from here. So anyway, that's one of the British protectorates. And then I found this trio tracking alignments. I found Ascension Island there at the top when I was following an alignment that started in Merida, and I was, tracking it on down through these other island groups and across the Atlantic Ocean into Africa. And Ascension Island is rather interesting. This group is, they're all part of the same protectorate now. Okay, so anyway, they're all kind of grouped together, even though there's some distance between them, but they are on alignments. And so what's interesting about Ascension Island, so this was the only speck of land as I was crossing from like, let's see, further down. So anyway, I'm going down this way, and it's the only land that this alignment is crossing over. And that was years ago. So this is a picture of Ascension Island. And what's interesting about it, besides the name, is that it is, there's a U.S. military air base there. There's satellite and submarine tracking stations, a BBC transmitter, and a listening post run by GCHQ's Composite Signals Organization. And they've been squeezing the residents out for over 100 years. So there's something about that little place they really like.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking around even where I live, and I'll see, an array of antennas in a particular spot on top of one of the mountains near where I live, and I'm thinking, there's, something about these former tree locations that are powerful and desired. And then another of these three islands is St. Helena, which is best known as the location of Napoleon's exile following his defeat at Waterloo in 1815. And I was looking at incline railways not too long ago and stumbled across St. Helena, which has a history of an incline here, kind of in the middle. And today it's a staircase called Jacob's Ladder, and it leads from Jamestown, which is the capital city of St. Helena, up to Ladder Hill Fort and the suburb of Half Tree Hollow. And that's the name of it, up at the top, Half Tree Hollow. And then doing research in another location, I was actually doing research on the East India Company on India, and I came across this silver bullion, 10 ounces of silver, commemorating the East India Company. It was minted in 2021 on St. Helena. And I thought it was really interesting. Not only was it the East India Company, but there's ley lines showing on this silver. I thought that was interesting. I just want to. Okay, so anyway, that's what it looks like from above. So anyway, there's this neighborhood called Half Tree Hollow.
You can see
up
it.
at the top of Ladder Hill. So, they're telling us things in the name, and we don't think anything of it, or used to not. Here's one.
That does look, yeah, much better for everyone.
Again, until you get tuned into it, it's like
The size is so
just a name.
blows my mind. It's just so big. What a world.
And then Tristan da Cunha, which I also found on Tracking and Alignment, is interesting because it's the most remote settlement on Earth. And its capital is Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. And this is the only inhabited island here. I guess there's a couple. Maybe a few of those little guys there. And it's hard to get there. Really out in the middle of Nowheresville.
Wow. Wow. It's just that's better than Tenerife. Well, that's great.
So this is the world's most isolated settlement. There's no airstrip on the main island, and the only way of traveling in and out is by boat, which is a 6-day trip from South Africa. And yet they live there. And again, until the giant tree thing came up, I didn't see it. But now you kind of see it in the shape, and I guess there's a volcano there, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I have to check that out when you do your extra research, Chad. But anyway, these have come up on tracking alignments for me. And I was curious to see if Alexander von Humboldt had ever been there, and couldn't find a record of him being there, but there was this cruise ship with his name on it that showed up back in a couple of years ago. So I'm highlighting him because I think he was part of this new effort. And the main university in Berlin, Humboldt University, was named after him and his brother, Wilhelm. And it's prestigious. There's more Nobel laureates that came from there. It was prestigious for natural sciences in the 19th century. This also has alumni that included Albert Einstein and Otto von Bismarck and Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the Brothers Grimm, all these big names of the reset went there. So I'm just pointing that out to say there's something going on here with this guy and with the subsequent mining of the earth. So that's really what it's all been about.
Yeah.
And using us as labor for a lot of that stuff. So this is the British Antarctic Territory, one of the British protectorates. And you find images like this down there. So that's 4 of countless examples from the British. I included French. And, again, the idea is these islands that they were claiming out in the middle of nowhere were tree stumps.
And in turn, resources, and in turn, energy, and in turn, there's so much that comes from that. Yeah.
They wanted these places.
I wanted them.
And I've done some work on disputed islands, and I'll talk about that towards the end. I mean, they're fighting over these little little nothings. It's like, why? Well, now we know. So the French Southern Antarctic lands, Amsterdam Island, and I did an alignment from here. And this is where I think I had some help from my guides or whoever, when I was selecting places to do these circle alignments from, because there was quite a bit of information that was yielded from them. So in a way, I kind of picked Amsterdam Island out of the air, but in a way I didn't. And it was one of the first long distance alignments that I did back in 2018, early 2019, somewhere in there.
Nice.
Again, a lot of information came from it. I did not see a giant tree stump when I first started doing this, but these islands tend to have scientific stations on them.
Yeah.
And this particular island is studied for its electromagnetic waves and things like that. So there's something going on here. So that's Ile Amsterdam. Another one is Ile St. Paul, right next, not too far away, relatively speaking. And yeah, so this one has, so we've talked about the volcanoes, but I also think we're talking about some of these giant trees having water. The Kerguelen Islands is another one of the French subantarctic islands. So they're, South Indian Ocean, getting down towards Antarctica.
Yeah.
Again, without giant trees, you might not see it, but it starts to take shape and form. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, what happened to the rest of the tree? And that's where the volcano idea is so, something exploded simultaneously and they all lost their tops.
I'll show you something as well, Michelle. I'll put it on the screen maybe now. Every active volcano, if you look at the map, it's like it hits the border. So how can I imagine? It's like the barrier. It's like something's. You can almost see it's targeted. It's the edges of everything. It's very particular where they lie. The active ones. You imagine a village being plundered, and you burn the towers on the outside, and then you go in. It was like they're still on fire, man. They're still burning in a sense. They're still they're still hurting. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'll throw it up. It's quite particular.
And I've got something that's going to tie into that in just a moment. This is another French grouping. The Isle Cochon, I think, is what they are. This is part of the French subantarctic lands. So Kerguelen, these islands here, Ile Amsterdam and Ile St. Paul. And then there's French overseas departments. And you've got more examples. This is Reunion Island, which is near Mauritius off the east coast of Africa. And, again, you've kind of got something here, crater-like going on. That you can kind of see it, the giant tree aspect of it. And then this one is Mayotte, on the other side of Madagascar, also off the east coast of Africa. And, you've got the circular area going on here and water inside. And even if you're not sure about what we're talking about, ask yourself, why do they want these places? They're going out exploring and they're, claiming these little islands for their respective countries and making a big deal out of it. It's like, why? New Caledonia here off of not far from Australia, and I found this on an alignment also. A lot of interesting land features here in New Caledonia. Same thing with French Polynesia. I think this is Bora Bora, but again, you find the same idea. Willis and Futuna is interesting because not only you have the circular crater with the water in it, you also got these flags. This one particularly with the Templar cross on it.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a grab going on here. Guadeloupe in the Eastern Caribbean, claimed by the French.
How do you see these circles? Because when I'm looking at them, I imagine a lot mining again going on, like quarrying, the taking? Is that how you see them, or do you see it different?
Well, so some of these giant trees are clearly volcanic in origin. This could be a different kind of giant tree that was like a water tree, something to do with water here. And there's blue hole type, deep pure water places on the earth. And so, there could have been different elements associated with different trees.
Elemental trees in a sense. Yeah.
So that's kind of what my thought was, but I'm just, guessing like the rest of us. So I mentioned Guadeloupe in the Eastern Caribbean was claimed by the French. And I found St. Pierre and Miquelon the very first time when I was tracking an alignment from Washington, D.C. It was a long distance alignment, and I tracked it a long way back to Washington. And again, I didn't see the trees before, but this is a French protectorate. So, it looks like that's what they were seeking. And what was interesting with this trip I was just on not too long ago, I like within the last couple of days, I had to go back to Tampa, and I got bored, and I was checking out the flight tracker on Southwest Airlines, and I was really surprised because what was coming up were these little islands that I've been looking at. And so, for example, Clipperton Island, and I'm going to talk about it in just a moment, is down here. And then there's what looks like a volcano in Mexico, and I'm not even going to, okay, I'll try to pronounce it. Citlal. And on the tracker itself, it looks like a little volcano because there's a little bit of fire in there. And then all over on the map, if you will, of the flight tracker, I saw these Mount something or another. I even saw Mount Ararat, Mount Alberta. Just different mountains that look like they might have been volcanoes. It's like here, you can barely see it on here, but here's Mount Alberta. Here's some kind of caldera right above Denver. And then I saw St. Pierre and Miquelon. Well, who in the heck's ever heard of that place? The only reason I knew about it was because of the alignment was tracking. I didn't have any pre-knowledge of it, and I certainly haven't heard of it since. But it's on this flight tracker. So, and this right here on this third one, the alignment from Washington I was tracking went through South Padre Island. It went through New Orleans. It went through Atlanta. It went through Washington and Wilmington and Philadelphia. It went through New York. It went through St. Pierre and Miquelon. It went through Newfoundland, and then went through Nova Scotia. Yeah. So after I left Newfoundland, I crossed over the Atlantic into Spain. So what? Why are they on these flight trackers? I think the yellow is probably where they have Southwest flights, but it just really didn't explain this, and it was on my mind with putting this presentation together because I had included the St. Pierre and Miquelon slide, and then I was working on updating something that I had done several years ago on disputed islands, and I came to Clipperton Island, which I ended this with Clipperton Island, the other place that caught my attention on the Southwest tracker. So it's uninhabited. It's 2 square mile or 6 kilometer squared island in the Eastern Pacific off the coast of Central America. And it's a minor territory of France. And it's not been inhabited since 1945, though it gets visited by fishermen, Navy patrol, scientific researchers, film crews, and ham radio operators. So this is what it looks like. It's low-lying and largely barren. It's not disputed now, though it's been in the past. And it was first claimed for France in 1711. And this whole story about during France's Second Empire in 1858, Emperor Napoleon III annexed Clipperton Island as part of the French colony of Tahiti, even though it is 3,400 miles or 5,400 kilometers from Tahiti. It was named Clipperton for an English pirate and privateer, and he fought the Spanish in the early 18th century, and it was thought he might have used it as a base for his raids on shipping. Other claimants included the United States, whose American Guano Company claimed it under the Guano Islands of Act of 1856, which basically allowed them to take whatever they wanted for guano. And then Mexico claimed it in 1848, 1849. That was kind of around the time of the Mexican-American War. And then the King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, declared Clipperton to be a French possession, and that kind of ended the dispute over sovereignty to binding international arbitration.
But from that picture there, that photo you've just showed, why again, why would they be fighting over this? Just you know what I mean?
My point.
That little bit of sand and a little bit of lagoon kind of thing, you know what I mean? And they're all, yeah.
So after all that interest, Clipperton Island has been more or less abandoned since the end of World War II. They fight over it and then they leave it alone. It's just what we're told. So I'm adding this stuff this morning because I just got back from this trip last night at 8 o'clock. And I find the Clipperton fracture zone. And it's a geological submarine fracture zone in the Pacific Ocean. It's got that place's name. And they are looking at it for deep sea mining due to the abundant presence of manganese nodules.
Did you do this last night? Is this last night?
I did. This is this morning.
This morning.
Before
you know what
we
I watched
talk.
last night? I watched Meg 2, The Trench, and it was all about deep sea mining. And they go under, and they have to break a barrier to a trench. There's a lot of things there, but there's an underground base under there, and it just got me thinking. And then you've got this here, and I just thought that's a.
And I wouldn't have known about it. I knew about Clipperton Island, and I was going to add that to this presentation. And then then it pops up, it populates. Like, oh, I took a look at that. Okay, so there's that. And before I go into the last two thoughts here, let's stop, because this is a lot of information. And with the way my mind works, I don't always do it in a logical and sequential way. And I apologize for anybody that likes it all nicely packaged and presented.
Yeah.
It's like my processes are intuitive, and I just kind of go with how it builds in my mind. So what makes sense for me, may take people watching until the end of the whole thing to get it. So I want to stop here and do my best to summarize what I think is going on here to this point. There was a beautiful, highly advanced civilization all over the earth, technologically advanced. It was a scientific and musical instrument that was precisely tuned. It was nothing like anything we've ever been taught in our whole lives about ourselves, the nature of the earth, the nature of the universe. All of that was known. And there were very jealous, envious beings out there that aren't organic, that are parasitic in nature. Not dumb, but not creative, not original. They can kind of deconstruct and rework things but they need human energy to survive and thrive. At the same time, they're oppressing us and suppressing us and abusing us and misusing us and lying to us. So they took an opportunity, I believe, to crash the system. And that this happened not too long ago. And they came in, they dug things out, they restarted enough infrastructure to restart civilization according to what they wanted. And they superimposed this fake history and figured out ways to enslave humanity, which they can't do because we're sovereign beings. But if we don't know we're sovereign or what our rights are, then, you know, they convince us that they are all powerful and we're not. And so I am seeing one cataclysmic event. I'm open to the possibility of more than one in a finite period of time, but this took place over a very, very long period of time, millennia. And so this civilization evolved and developed synchronistically and was integrated. And I'm not just saying that out of the air or not having given a lot of time and thought to it. I've done a lot of research over the last 5 years. And these are the conclusions that I've come to. And with the addition of the giant trees, it's starting to come together even more. And there's a lot we don't know, right, Chad? This is just what makes sense. If you want to add to that, go ahead.
No, there's a lot that obviously we're still finding out. Well, it's an uncovering, isn't it? It seems to be more an uncovering, and we're adding pieces to the puzzle. And more in a way to try and build a picture for everybody else, you know, and spread the awareness. You know, it feels like a role to me anyway. You know, and I know it does. So it's just the spreading of light and building it in a way people can understand, and that's hard enough itself. Not just getting the research and doing it all and coming to the conclusions and piecing it all together, doing it in an explainable way that makes sense. Through you're talking about what millions of different things, different aspects. You're talking about years upon years and treaties and this and that and how they've done it and this aspect and that aspect. You can't just talk about one thing, can you? So we're trying to do it in a way that builds everything together. You know, I've done my private stuff with the education and the MK, and that's all part of it, as you know, and you've tried to say as well.
It's kind of a way to put forward something that is really very difficult to grasp, because there's been so much information, misinformation, disinformation, you know, deliberate obfuscation, and a lot of people doing a lot of different research on what they've been guided to research. And it's all valuable. Every last bit of it is valuable. You know, anything that can be done to bring this lost information back from the dustbin of, back from the ether, you know, from the trash can, to try to bring forward at least a cohesive, a theory or a hypothesis or a picture of what looks like happened here.
Just to finish on that, Michelle, you know, we'll do our best to piece everything together, and many people have different aspects that they don't agree on, which often separate us. But I feel the call for anyone watching this is to do your own research, to find out for yourself, but to find yourself as well. And people call that different things. You know, I sometimes get slandered because I talk about finding the self and mastery of the self, and it takes it away from God. It's not. It's the exact same thing, because when we go in and we help ourselves, we can connect to more. We can help other people. We become a beacon of light, and that's all I ever mean. So the one thing that we can do is just remember that, you know, find within. And as you spoke about sovereignty, and once you found that within, you've got more protection, you know, and it's waking people up to what they are.
Absolutely.
Not
And they've
just
tricked us into thinking we don't have any power.
Yeah.
And, you know, give it all away because we don't think we have any choices.
Yeah.
And what, you know, what they're afraid of is us realizing that we do. We're getting together. That's what they're really afraid of and what this has all really been about. So just a couple more thoughts here at the end. One is I'm currently working on something about Australia that I hope to have out. It'll probably be out by the time this comes out. And what I'm seeing, and there's places called bights, B-I-G-H-T. And I've got an example of this Southern California bight here in the top left, the Great Australian bight in the bottom left, and the New York, New Jersey bight. And Chad, I'll send you the slide for this so it's clearer. But they have the same kind of sheared off, eroded looking landscape. And I'm thinking the B-I-G-H-T is like B-I-T-E, a bite.
Yeah.
And this to me is where the land has just sheared off. And, you know, if you look at Google Earth or, you know, maps that show the elevation, and I'll give you an example here in a moment, there's something going on underneath the surface here. But along these bights, which look very similar in different parts of the world, and these are just 3 examples. I've seen other good examples. There's lighthouses here, but I don't think lighthouses were originally used to guide ships. I think they were more like a house for light, to precisely distribute the energy generated by this gigantic integrated system that was in perfect alignment with everything on Earth and in heaven, which included the Statue of Liberty, which was a functioning lighthouse at one time. And you know, again, these are just a few examples. You've got, you know, perfect solar and lunar alignments with these lighthouses. And what I think happened is when this cataclysm took place, and it's just an example of a lighthouse that had to be moved, or that's what they tell us anyway, because the land that it was next to was so eroded and unstable. This was in Rhode Island, on Block Island. So I've looked at New York, New Jersey shore. This is the Southern California shore. This is the Lighthouse Trail close to the bight, Great Australian Bight. And then the Apostle Islands are here in Wisconsin on the southern shore of Lake Superior. And there's a grouping of rock formations here called the 12 Apostles in Australia. So you've got the 12 apostles with lighthouses here on the edge, and you've got the Apostle Islands with lighthouses here. You've got the Southern California bight with lighthouses here, and then New York, New Jersey. I think the lighthouses were involved in how the land sheared off. That whatever the cataclysm was caused the lighthouses to malfunction or function incorrectly, and that the land just sheared off there. Because you got lighthouses in crazy places, and there's, you know, broken, eroded land around them, and underwater there's reefs. It's dangerous. It's, you know, it's commensurate with broken land lying underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And then there's even a light characteristic pattern of the lighthouse light called occulting. And so I think they've occulted this timeline. And this is just an area off the bight or near the bight. So anyway, there's all these little islands, and then there's all of these, you know, things that obstruct shipping, they're called. There's a whole bunch of those. and obstacles to shipping. Over 1,200 obstacles to shipping that stretch 140 miles or 230 kilometers. So it's like there's something going on beneath the surface of the water at these places. But again, they want to put it far back in time. This happened in the Pleistocene Ice Age. It used to be connected. And again, I don't think it was that long ago. And I do think that whatever caused a cataclysm, whether it's the Philadelphia experiment, like I think, or something else, it caused this worldwide ripple effect along the grid system, where the grids were, this energy went through the grids and caused the land to shear off. And then it caused swamps, it caused deserts and dunes. And again, I can back what I'm saying up with research that I've done and I'm doing currently. And I'm sure in the future, because the more you get into this, the more pieces come back out. But you kind of have to put effort into it, is what I find, is that it just doesn't come. But when you get into this co-creative process, it just, the more you ask for, the more you receive. That's been my experience with it. I want to wrap it up here in just a second, but any thoughts on that, Chad? Because you've done work on ray lines, which is a fascinating concept, and I think it ties into that idea.
Yeah, there's a few things that need to warrant my attention a little bit more. As we say, we're all learning. I think lighthouses is one of them. I think there's more to look into volcanoes, just different aspects, and things will come. But I like what you're saying about them. I think they're significant to the lays or the rays. Again, I'm not sure on a theory or anything, so I'll leave that to you.
but you're making connections to these things. So you put out a whole video called Ray Lines.
Yeah.
And these lighthouses are also lined up with each other on the grid. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're definitely connected to the grid.
It's 100% connected to the grid, aren't they? They're significant. Again, I don't. I've looked at the lighthouse as more of a philosophical thing in terms of the light at the top and the down. There's a lot of spiritual elements to it as well. It almost follows the human body again, with the staircase being like the spiral. It follows DNA. It follows the realm, if you want, with the light at the top, and it'll sit in, and it imitates trees, like their trunk, and the energy that would be emanating from the tree itself. So that I do see that. I just haven't thought about that further, but I will for you. And I agree with most things you're saying about it. Key to the lay, key to the grid. There's a lot more to them. It'd be interesting. I'll have to visit one in the UK, and you get to you try and visit one in the US.
And something that's really important to mention is that in our narrative, everything was built randomly and haphazardly. This place needs a lighthouse because of the rocky shores or whatever, which in no way explains the presence and the integration of the same infrastructure all over the earth. That it was just, built by some guy. Or this city was founded by this prominent person that purchased the land, and then they developed it, and then a month or 2 months or a year later, this whole town was there. The narrative is just really weak and flimsy, and the only reasonable way they would have had to keep that secret or under wraps would for the internet never to have been invented, because that's really what opened the door for our awakening.
Yeah.
And my understanding was originally developed as a control mechanism, but it's allowed this instantaneous connection all over the earth. And so there's just a lot of holes in their story. And once you start looking at that, it's like the whole thing falls apart. But they've had the edge with the programming and the brainwashing through music and the educational system and movies and everything.
I feel, as you say, that imitation was their undoing. That everything they do is an imitation of the creation, and that imitation really is our connection. It's the connection to all, the connection to oneness, which is, I see the web as being an ultimate imitation of that. So that imitation that they did of that is actually strengthened us, and it's almost their undoing. Don't get me wrong, there's its downfalls too, but you're right. It would have never spread the way it has without it, and I think it's because of what they're imitating, which is the connection itself.
Right. So when you look at the towers, the cell towers, or even electrical pole towers, I've got some near me that look like trees, and the tar on them look like sap. So there's just we so much of what we use in our world today was already pre-existing. It was already there, including these electrical lines and so forth. So hopefully we've raised enough questions to where you can really do your own research, like Chad mentioned earlier. And that's really what it's about, just seeing for yourself, questioning the narrative, because there's a lot to question. And I'm just going to end with a comment somebody made this morning for me to look into Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart's transatlantic flights. And I'm not going to go into any detail here, but I just wanted to point out Howland Island, which was where Amelia Earhart's plane was said to have been lost. And so this is what it looks like. Kind of a weird potential tree stump, but okay. But what's really interesting is, if you look at the land here, you can kind of see, stuff going on underneath there. And this is also one of the alignments that I was tracking, this island group here. Because there's Howland Island and I think Baker Island. Not much out there in the middle of the ocean. There's some kind of lighthouse there. I guess that was the lighthouse. It's something that's there, but here we go. Here's the Howland Island Lighthouse. And I'm going on the premise that these things were pre-existing infrastructure. I do not believe they were built when we're told. A lighthouse was built in memory of Amelia Earhart on Howland Island, and that's what they tend to do. It was a memorial. And I'm just going to finish up. Found this in Esperance in southern Australia, what I'm working on right now, is Stonehenge. Stonehenge, multi-ton blocks of stone there with alignments to the Milky Way and the summer solstice and the winter solstice. That was supposedly built between 2008 and when it opened as a tourist attraction in 2017. And there's another one just like it in Washington State, the Maryhill Stonehenge here, which looks very much like the Esperance Stonehenge. And it was said to have been built in 1918 by a wealthy entrepreneur named Sam Hill as a memorial to the people who died in World War I. And it also has solstice and Milky Way alignments. And that's what I say when you really look at what the narrative says about things, it's pretty ridiculous.
Might be a connection to me with that. I live down the road from Merry Hill, but it's spelled Merry. It was a big quarry. I looked on the old maps. Now it's a huge shopping centre brought by these brothers. It's called the Westfield Centres.
The Esperance Stonehenge is on Maryvale Road, Merivale. So I got Maryvale, Mary Hill, and you're Mary Hill, right? So yeah,
the name difference, isn't it? Mary. It's very similar. Yeah.
So just giving you all some things to think about.
Love and light.
Love and light.